Look at your bank account right now. What are you looking at? Most of us spend the majority of our waking lives chasing money. We stress over it, we trade our best years for it, and we measure our success by the accumulation of it. But if I ask you to define what money actually is, you'd probably point to a piece of paper in your wallet or a digital number on a screen. But paper isn't money. Code isn't money. Those are just the containers. To understand why a piece of paper can buy a house, or why a six-figure salary doesn't feel like enough anymore, we have to strip away the illusion. We have to look at the underlying mechanics of the system. Because money isn't a physical object. It's a technology. And more specifically, it's a technology designed to capture, store, and transport the most finite resource in the universe, your time. To see how this technology works, we have to look at the origin story we were all taught in school and why that story is completely wrong. You probably heard the barter myth. The story goes that before money, early humans relied entirely on a barter economy. If I was a cobbler who made shoes and you were a farmer who raised chickens, we would simply trade my shoes for your chickens. It sounds logical, but anthropologically, pure barter economies almost never existed. They are incredibly inefficient because they run into a massive mathematical wall known as the double coincidence of wants. Think about the friction in that system. For a trade to happen, I have to want exactly what you're selling, and you have to want exactly what I'm producing at the exact same time in the exact same quantities. If I want your chickens, but you already have a pair of shoes and really just need some apples, the economy halts. I have to go find an apple farmer who happens to need shoes, trade for the apples, and then bring those apples back to you just to get my dinner. It's a logistical nightmare. It doesn't scale. So how did early societies actually function? Well, it's simple. They used credit. They used communal memory. In small villages, everyone knew everyone. If I needed a chicken today, you gave it to me and we both mentally recorded that I owed you a favor. I was in your debt. The ledger of who owed what to whom was stored in the collective memory of the community. But as villages turned into cities and you started trading with strangers you would never see again, communal memory wasn't enough. You couldn't trust a stranger to remember a favor. We needed a physical representation of that communal memory. We needed a physical ledger. We needed a universal proxy that everyone agreed upon so we didn't have to rely on the double coincidence of wants. That is a true invention of money. It was the formalization of debt and favors. If you want ultimate proof that money is just an agreed upon accounting system, look at the Yap Islanders in Micronesia. For centuries, their currency consisted of massive limestone discs called rice stones. Some of these stones were 12 feet across and weighed thousands of pounds. They were so heavy that when a transaction occurred, they didn't physically move the stone. The buyer and seller would simply announce to the village that the ownership of the stone had changed hands. The physical location of the money did not matter. Only the consensus of the ledger mattered. In fact, one of the most valuable rice stones was being transported across the ocean when a storm hit, and the stone sank to the bottom of the sea. But because the crew survived and testified that the stone existed, the village agreed it still had value. For generations, people bought and sold land using a giant rock that was resting at the bottom of the ocean, unseen by human eyes. Money is not the object. Money is the collective hallucination that the object has value. It is the ledger. So if money is just a physical or digital ledger of favors, what are you actually trading when you go to work? You're trading your metabolic energy. You're trading your time. When you spend 40 hours a week sitting at a desk, pouring your intellectual and physical energy into a job, you're expending finite resources that you can never get back. In return, society hands you a token, a unit of currency. That currency is a receipt for the energy you put into the world. It is an economic battery. You charge that battery with your labor today, with the trust that you can discharge it tomorrow or next year, or in retirement to extract an equal amount of labor and energy back from society. You build a spreadsheet, society gives you a token, and you use that token to have someone else build your house, grow your food, or even fix your car. This is the paradigm shift that separates the wealthy from everyone else. The middle class views money as the finish line. They believe the goal is to acquire as many of these tokens as possible and stockpile them in a savings account. The wealthy view money as a temporary, highly volatile transport mechanism. They understand that money is a battery, but it is actually an incredibly leaky battery. If you store your life's energy in the form of fiat currency, like the US dollar, the euro, or the yen, you are storing it in a system that is mathematically designed to leak. Every single year, the tokens you acquire require more of them to purchase the exact same amount of goods. The battery slowly drains. This is why the wealthy don't hoard cash. They use the cash to buy finite, scarce assets that cannot be printed. Real estate, businesses, commodities. They convert the leaky battery of fiat currency into hard assets that actually preserve their human time. We accept the system because we trust the ledger. We trust the tokens will hold their charge just long enough for us to use them. But what happens when the people managing the ledger realize they have the power to just create more tokens out of thin air? What happens when the physical tether is completely severed and the money becomes entirely abstract? Money is a technology, but the value of that technology is entirely dependent on a shared illusion. In our next video, we're going to walk into the dark. We're going to look at the exact moment in history when the fundamental rules of money were quietly rewritten and discover what actually gives these digital numbers their power. Because if you don't know what gives money its value, you'll never understand why yours keeps disappearing. In our last video, we stripped away the illusion of paper and coins, and we defined what money actually is at its core. It's not wealth in itself, it's an economic battery. It's a technology designed to store your human time and metabolic energy so you can trade it with the world. But stepping into the reality of how modern money actually works is like walking into a dense, overgrown jungle. It is confusing, it is deliberately obscured, and the deeper you go, the more you realize that the rules of the game have been completely rewritten while you weren't looking. Because if you ask the average person what gives a $100 bill its value, they will probably tell you it's backed by the government, or maybe they still believe it's backed by gold. But the terrifying reality is that the money sitting in your bank account right now is backed by absolutely nothing. Zero. It has no intrinsic value. You're trading the most finite resource you have, your time, for an abstract unit of measurement sustained purely by a collective hallucination. To understand how we got here, we have to hack through the brush and look at the ruins of the old system. For the vast majority of human history, money was tethered to physical reality. It was a commodity. Things like gold and silver were used because they naturally possessed the required properties of money. They were durable, divisible, portable, and most importantly, they had a strictly limited supply. You couldn't just print more gold. You had to expand a massive amount of human energy and capital to dig it out of the ground. When paper money was eventually introduced, it was never intended to replace the gold. The paper was simply a technology of convenience. It was a claim check. Under the gold standard, a $20 bill was essentially a coat check ticket. It had value because you could theoretically walk into a bank, hand them a piece of paper, and they were legally obligated to hand you a physical, scarce piece of gold in return. The paper wasn't the value. The paper was merely a receipt for the value stored in the vault. And because governments were restricted by the amount of physical gold they actually held, they couldn't just arbitrarily print an infinite amount of paper receipts. The system had a physical anchor. It was grounded in reality. But then the anchor was cut. The pivotal moment in modern economic history happened in 1971, an event known as the Nixon shock. The United States officially suspended the convertibility of the dollar into gold. Overnight, the most powerful currency on the planet severed its tether to physical reality. In that exact moment, money stopped being a receipt for a scarce commodity, and it became something entirely different. It became fiat currency. Fiat is a Latin word that translates to "let it be done" or "by decree." It means the money has value simply because the government declared that it has value. There is no gold in the vault. There is no physical backing. When you remove the physical anchor, you grant central banks and governments a terrifying superpower: the ability to expand the money supply infinitely, without having to expend any actual energy. They can simply type new digits into a ledger or print new paper, diluting the purchasing power of every single dollar you have already earned. This is the invisible tax of inflation. Your economic battery isn't just leaking by accident. The people managing the grid are actively draining it to fund their own debt. So this brings us to the ultimate question. If fiat currency is just a piece of paper, and if the central banks can print an infinite amount of it, mathematically guaranteeing that it will lose its value over time, why do we all still use it? Why don't we just stop playing the game? Why don't we collectively reject the illusion? Because the illusion is enforced.
Stop!
The baseline demand for fiat currency is not driven by mutual trust. It's driven by the threat of consequences. It's driven by taxes. Every year, the government demands a cut of the economic energy you produced, and they dictate the exact medium in which that debt must be paid. You cannot pay your property taxes in chickens. You cannot pay your income tax in silver. You must pay it in the fiat currency they issue. If you refuse to play the game, or if you try to step outside of the system and ignore their currency, the enforcers arrive. The state uses the threat of asset seizure, legal action, and physical imprisonment to ensure that you continuously demand their specific paper tokens. You are actively hunted by a system that forces you to store your wealth in a melting ice cube, purely so they can extract the runoff. This is the consensus illusion. It is a fragile psychological reality where your net worth only exists because millions of other people wake up every day and agree to participate in the exact same hallucination under the exact same threats. The wealthy understand this chase. They know the enforcers are coming. They know the paper's designed to lose. That is why they never hold the currency. As soon as they acquire the fiat tokens, they instantly trade them for finite, hard assets like real estate, starting businesses, or purchasing commodities. They escape the trap by holding the things that the government cannot print. But the system is shifting again. The tether to gold was cut decades ago. But now, we're approaching an even more radical severing. The government no longer needs the printing press because they no longer need the paper. If the money's just a ledger of control, what happens when that ledger becomes 100% digital? What happens when every single transaction you make is permanently recorded, tracked, and programmed by a central bank digital currency? We have survived the jungle of fiat money, but in our next and final video, we're stepping off the cliff. We're looking into the horizon to discover what money will become in the future and how you can position yourself before the final trap is sprung. If you watched the first 2 parts of this series, you now understand the mechanics of the trap. You know that money is not a piece of paper, it's a technology used to store your human time and energy. You also know that since 1971, the fiat currency system has been completely severed from physical reality. It's an illusion, a leaky battery designed to slowly drain your purchasing power to fund the debts of the state, enforced by the threat of consequence. But as dangerous as the paper fiat system is, it still has one fatal flaw for the people trying to control it. It's analog. Cash is private. Cash is physical. When you hand a $20 bill to a farmer for a carton of eggs, the central bank has no idea that transaction took place. For a system built on total consensus and control, privacy is a threat. And that is why the rules of the game are about to change one final time. We're leaving the jungle of paper money, and we're stepping into a fully digital panopticon, a system of absolute surveillance, designed like a prison, where the central guards can see, track, and record every single move you make. Welcome to the era of the Central Bank Digital Currency. When you hear the term Central Bank Digital Currency, or CBDC, your first thought is probably, isn't my money already digital? It is true that when you swipe a debit card or use an app on your phone, you are trading digital numbers, but those numbers are liabilities of your local commercial bank. They're private ledgers. A CBDC is fundamentally different. A CBDC is a direct digital liability of the central bank itself. It completely removes the commercial banks, the physical cash, and the privacy from the equation. It places every single citizen on one centralized, unified digital ledger controlled by the state. They will market this to you as a massive upgrade. They'll tell you it's frictionless, instantaneous, and mathematically secure. They will promise you universal basic income deposited directly into your digital wallet in the blink of an eye. They will use the ultimate Trojan horse of human history, convenience. But you cannot trade privacy for convenience without ultimately trading away your freedom. Because a CBDC is not just a digital dollar, it's programmable money. And this is the most terrifying financial innovation ever conceived. When money is nothing but centralized code, the people who write the code can attach terms and conditions to your purchasing power. The economic battery that holds your life's energy is no longer just leaky. It's now remote controlled by the manufacturer. Imagine a world where the central bank decides the economy's moving too slowly to force you to spend. They simply program a negative interest rate into your digital wallet. Or worse, they put an expiration date on your money. If you do not spend your tokens by Friday, they simply vanish from your account. The fundamental human right to save your own energy for the future is deleted with a single line of code. But the programmable control goes far deeper than just economics. It's the ultimate tool for social engineering. What happens when your ability to transact is tied to a digital identity or a social credit score? If the state decides you have purchased too much red meat this month and you have exceeded your designated carbon footprint, your digital money simply will not work at the grocery store. The payment will decline. If you attempt to donate to a political cause the government fundamentally disagrees with, the transaction is blocked. If you try to travel outside of your approved geographic zone, your money is turned off until you return home. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is the openly stated utility of programmable ledgers. A CBDC turns money from a tool of empowerment into a collar of compliance. It is a cage made entirely of code. If they can control exactly what you buy, where you buy it, and when you are allowed to spend it, they completely own your autonomy. You cannot outrun a centralized network from inside the grid. If you stay in their system, you accept their terms. So what is the alternative? How do you protect your time and your energy when the state has complete control over the ledger? You have to step outside of it. Throughout this series, we established that money requires consensus. The Fiat system and the incoming CBDC system enforce that consensus through state power and the threat of consequence. But what if there was a ledger that no one controlled? What if there was a decentralized network maintained by hundreds of thousands of computers around the world, where the rules of the game were locked in stone and could never be changed by a politician or a central banker? This is the true revolution of our lifetime. For the first time in human history, we have the ability to opt into a monetary system that is completely decentralized, absolutely scarce, and completely immune to programmable state control. Whether it is the return to hard physical assets or the adoption of decentralized digital protocols like Bitcoin, the counter movement is already here. The wealthy are already moving their energy into systems that cannot be diluted, frozen, or expired. They build their wealth on solid ground, far away from the leaky batteries and programmable traps of the state. Money is simply the technology of time. It's the physical or digital representation of the hours you have sacrificed and the value you provided to the world. The system you choose to store that time in will dictate your entire future. If you choose the centralized ledger, you're trading your freedom for convenience. You're handing the remote control of your life over to an entity that has mathematically guaranteed they will drain your energy. But if you choose the decentralized ledger, you take your power back. If you want to understand exactly how these decentralized escape routes work and how to build your wealth on solid ground before the programmable cage is locked, make sure to subscribe to Sculpting Economics. We're just getting started.